been used almost as much as AI in this session the last 3 days. It's been sovereignty. So I think it's good that we get 24 minutes and 47 seconds to discuss what sovereignty is about. So I'll jump straight in. We've got a great panel. And I think the key question of sovereignty is a question of who gets to make the rules. And the way in which sovereignty has been discussed is in terms of where data is stored. So we have a variety of viewpoints here, and I'd look to get some opening remarks from each of you. So Sunil, I'll start with you. You're running some very large and very impressive data centers in India. One term that we've often heard is sovereign yet connected. So we want to be sovereign but connected. Is that realistic?
No, as you said that there are different ideas, different theories, different narratives going on in sovereign. Everybody has their own take on sovereignty. And so many times sovereignty is also confused with we will do everything ourselves. We'll start looking inwards. We will isolate ourselves from the rest of the world and everything is done by us also. I think let's understand any and every technology stack. AI is now the latest one. You will always have interconnectedness, interdependencies across the world. Somebody will be good at making chips. Somebody will be making raw material for the chips like gases and maybe rare earths. Somebody will be making models. Somebody will have great data sets. Somebody will be very good in making applications, agentic AI. You will have, and of course, capital flows. Somebody will have lots of capital and somebody will be waiting for that capital and somebody will have talent. We all know where India is good at and where any other country is good at. So sovereignty for sure does not mean we become isolated and just try to do everything ourselves. It is a matter of what is the thing we need to control and what is the thing where we need to collaborate. For sure, it definitely means that as a country, we do not allow a single country or a single company to define our digital destiny for future, right? Answering your second question, that there are certain things which are fundamental. Compute infrastructure, I strongly believe, has to be within your country, has to be within your control. That is where your data is getting processed. That is where data is getting stored. That is where your models are being made. Your needs as a country, forget control, your needs as a country are unique. You want to create a voice-based AI because majority of population may not be comfortable speaking in English or writing in English, but they'll be very, very comfortable talking in their own native language. We all are very comfortable talking rather in a mix of Hindi, English, Malayalam, Kannada, whatever our native languages, and we mix it with English. So if we are able to talk to a device in my own native language, with my own slang, and the device does all the processing and gives me my answer in real time in my own language, my slang, that is where the real benefit, that is where population scale benefits comes in. Maybe the model builders of any other country may have a different viewpoint of how they want to adopt AI at a global level. So frontier models are good for those use cases, but for India use cases, possibly I need the focus to go on my use cases which can benefit masses at a larger scale. So both from control point of view that nobody else should tomorrow just switch off my access to digital infrastructure, and also from the point of view that my priorities for my citizens can be different. I would rather like to have sovereign compute, right? And some of the models which are taking care of, let's say, as Minister I think said in the last 3-4 days in Davos also, that 95% of the use cases which India requires can possibly be handled by having models which are 20 billion to, let's say, 100 billion parameters. You don't need to necessarily go for frontier models, trillions of parameters. So we build our compute here, we store our data here, we allow controlled data flow outside, we build the models which are satisfying 95% of my need. That is what I need to do. But what we can do, and I give you our own example as Yotta. While on one side I'm building...
So Sunil, we'll just come back to that. We'll just get everybody else in and then we'll speak about your examples. I'm just mindful of time. So I think the takeaway is that as far as the infrastructure layer is concerned, as in sovereignty in compute is not only desirable, but perhaps possible. And as far as control is concerned, and we should try to have control, but I'll take that to you, Nasubo. Let's look at the design layer. I mean, Sunil gave what the infrastructure is about. Sovereignty is also about who makes the rules in terms of how things are designed. And what Sunil said may work for a very large country like India, where there are lots of builders, but how does it translate to the rest of the world? Maybe some experiences from Kala as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this. When you look at, or when you think about, let's say, Africa, sometimes we are disadvantaged in that we don't have compute. When you look at the computing capacity, it's like at 1%. So already we are at disadvantage before we even leapfrog and get ahead. But the one thing we have is we have data, we have use cases. So when it comes to use cases, how are we able to design for our lived realities? Because we, as he said, that the language, the different things that we are looking at. For example, when you look at the local needs, what are the things that we want that we can adopt? For example, if I look at the use case of health, if you look at how people in other sectors have been looking at health, for example, like we've done a lot of work on designing for our needs in terms of breast cancer. We were able to get like data sets from our lived context, knowing that when you look at the composition of the breast tissue for African women, it's different. So those are the use cases that we need to look at, because we can be confident and say that, yes, we don't have compute, but we have the use cases, and that's the important bit that we need to put into place. That in as much as we are disadvantaged, we have use cases, we have the people who are able to build. That's the one component that we never talk about. We always talk about, we are getting the data there, someone else is defining the rules, but we can define the rules by building the tools that actually work for the people in our context, and being confident that, once it works for our context, then people are going to use. Right.
That's right. I think that's a really powerful statement, because at the end of the day, it's only local people who have skin in the game who will build for local problems. And I think that's where actually the opportunity also lies. So I think that's a very critical intervention. And I'll take that to you, Seema. So we've discussed the infrastructure layer, the design layer, and I think it would be good to get a holistic perspective as far as critical systems and sovereignty in critical systems is concerned. Especially because, as Sunil was saying, that while we can certainly try to build compute and store it locally, it's again a pipe dream to think that any country can do everything itself. So there are, of course, questions of supply chains, trusted supply chains, who's supplying what, and how that control is going to be exercised. So maybe a little bit from your experiences as to what sovereignty means for you, building a large data center or many large data centers now in India, but in the rest of the world as well.
So first of all, thank you. I just keep it, I've answered this in two parts. And real quickly, right? So, critical question at the critical moment. I think it's very important. It's like an important, pertinent question for this decade. First question is, can you be connected and sovereign? Yes. I don't see a problem at all being sovereign and connected. I think over there, what is important to understand is basically the strategic control that you needs to be sovereign, and it remains sovereign. I think that's the definition more on sovereign. So you don't need to really build everything yourself. So if you want me to just elaborate around the three, what does really government look from its services? So it's like public services, critical citizen data, financial networks, AI systems, unlimited amount. So we're not talking of outsourcing, right, over here. What we are talking of is basically critical national infrastructure. I think it's very important to define not in general, but in specific, right, what it means. So let's look at three things. One is ownership. Is ownership very important across all the components in the supply chain and in the critical infrastructure for government? Not really. Not really. I think we need to define the extent to which you want to have ownership. Second is visibility into ownership structures. And third, I think for most important for all countries, whatever, developed, underdeveloped, developing, whatever it might be, I think it's important for all of us to treat like our digital assets like any other precious asset. And therefore, you have to have policies, guardrails that ensure whatever you have in a sovereign or semi-sovereign infrastructure is not compromised externally, and you have a degree of assurance where you don't have geopolitical leverage. I think that is important. That defines sovereignty to a great extent. So what does it mean for industry? Industry, we have seen some really good models come up, right? So there is like sovereign infrastructure model. I've seen some real good air-gapped, some kind of ring-fenced environments within the commercial infrastructure, which has been very interesting. And of course the public-private, which still remains. What does it all mean? It means no national, we are not trying, the goal is not to nationalize. I think the goal is assurance, which is most important. That's number one. That's your strategic ownership question. The second is operational efficiency. I think over here, yes, degree of sovereignty does matter. It goes well beyond a few definitions of infrastructure that we have. I think what is important here is to ensure the extent of operational control, look at efficiencies of operational control, the components within operational control that can be sovereign. So what does it mean for industry? We need to build things that are transparent, traceable, and also observable. I think that is the core to your design. That is sovereign design, then you decide how you want to implement it. Right? So the second thing, what does it mean? It means trust. So trust is not paper-based. Trust can only be engineered, and it needs to be verified, in my opinion. Okay, I'm quickly coming to the third question. I think you had so many things. Supply chain trust, absolutely. Today, if you look at data sovereignty, it goes well beyond data, digital data, right? It goes into hardware, chipsets, network components, AI provenance, a whole lot of stuff. So in this case, I think industry needs to basically, you can't isolate yourself. I do not believe in that. You need to forge very good technology global partnerships. It is important. Again, another degree of trust. The second thing is, of course, you can have some guardrails around it by the government, and you can govern that. I think what is most important in this case is to build some sovereign capacity by domestic, which is because in the age of AI, I strongly believe that the sovereign AI compute infrastructure has become a global leverage. So it is important, right? So these are my take, and basically what I also believe in this is national digital infrastructure for any countries, like a national infrastructure, which could be like a power grid, ports, or a telecom. So you treat it with that level of, whatever you need to do for it. Secondly, a very good guardrails from the government to safeguard sovereignty and govern it. Industry should focus on innovation and not worry too much, whatever you can not own, try to own everything, because it slows down your transition.
That's right.
And your aspiration of growth. And this is my little take on sovereignty.
No, that's great. And I think one underlying point that you made across these three is of trust. Because at the end of the day, you can't build everything yourself. Sovereign nations don't do things themselves, even in a non-AI analog world. So it's not that you're going to do everything yourself. But sovereignty is only partly what we say, but more importantly, I think, is what we do. And so I want to take that to each of you in terms of what you are doing in your own domains, in your own companies, and where that line, that what am I going to do myself? What am I going to do with somebody else? And if so, how will I ensure that this person is trusted and I have control? So Sunil, you were saying about Yotta and what you do, briefly, so that we can get the others in.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just go by the actual examples which we have sort of done in the last 2 years or so. Last week we inaugurated and made open to the world that India's AI language platform, which I think every government entity is using, Bhashini. We actually migrated that from a hyperscale cloud operator to our cloud. It's a combination of a whole lot of general compute services and AI and GPUs and all, on which all those language models are working, which are giving real-time translation services. Now, their purpose, considering that it is a digital public infrastructure, they were very, very clear that At no point of time we want to be dependent on the platform service of a hyperscale operator, because that makes stickiness that you cannot come out of that platform. Whether it is a hyperscale platform or for that matter Yotta's platform, they don't want to remain dependent on only one entity. They wanted to be independent. They wanted a choice. We ended up not only giving them the physical infrastructure, which was obviously local in my data center, but we ended up creating almost, I can say 30 or 40 different technologies we developed, put it on their virtual machines in their environment in my data center, and brought them into their control. They were not using PaaS anymore. At the last, when everything was going live, we suddenly realized there is one component, NVCF, which is a NVIDIA's software tool, which was still running on NVIDIA's platform somewhere in US, and it was not running in India. And then they said, even though it is all fine, NVIDIA is my biggest technology supplier, giving me GPU software, everything. But they said, no, this cannot go. This software component very critical for this whole structure, but it has to come within your control into my environment. So what we have done after that, after everything was done, was also to, and NVIDIA agreed to open source that part of the software, brought the software into our environment, and now it is running within my control. So what this example is telling, I'm just in same breath, I'm telling you same thing. I'm using the best of the foreign technologies. I'm using NVIDIA's technologies. I'm using, of course, open source technologies. I'm using Microsoft technology. We have great partnership with Azure. I'm using Amazon's technologies. But I'm not using these technologies in the public cloud. I'm using their technology stack within my ring-fenced walls, within my GPU and CPU compute infrastructure. The access control of these technologies firmly lies with me. No third party is able to log into my system and control or dictate what will be running and what will not be running. And that, I think, is the real balance, that you use the best technologies. These guys have spent hundreds of years, put billions of dollars in creating great technologies. We must benefit for that. But you use these technologies within your environment, within your control.
That's right. So I think partnership and not dependence. What I'm interested in, Nasubo, and I'll come to you on this, is what you're doing at Kala. Because what Sunil is saying may work, say, in a setting like India, where tell NVIDIA perhaps that some part can be stored on something locally. But I'm thinking of Malawi, I'm thinking of Lesotho or Eswatini, I'm thinking of smaller Southern African countries, which also will want to use AI for solving local problems. And so what does it look like from your perspective, having done so much work in Southern Africa?
When you look at, let's just first ground what Africa has, right? How are we going to use compute that also allows for offline? That is one of the use cases we are looking at, because in as much as digital connectivity is everywhere, in Africa it's up to like 50%. So how do we also ensure that people are able to use? So one of the ways that we do this is, one, we are working with global partners to give us compute, but at the same time we also want to buy compute for ourselves, because the conversations that he's talking about in the rules, creating the rules and the structure, can only be done once you also understand what is happening. So at Kala, we are also offering compute to different innovators, and if you go to our stand in Hall 14, you are able to interact with different African innovators from the AI village who are building AI innovations. And part of those innovations are innovations that allow for offline access. That is the one thing that, we need to be cognizant of. We need to understand how will it work practically. That's something that Kala is actively building, actively championing for, so that when we're having even conversations with government, we are going to them and saying, yes, compute is something that we may not have, but if you approach, let's say, big tech, and you're talking about, offering compute, offering us, being sovereign, this is what it means. So we are also having conversations with different African governments to talk about what we are learning, what people are building, and now having, once they have the understanding, now we can continue ensuring that our use cases are well represented. Because if we just take things that are dictated to us without having like a perspective, it means that we are building for exclusion. And for us, we want to ensure that all voices are well represented, including the people who are offline, who want to use AI for solving use cases in our sectors.
That's right, and I think this is resonating greatly because the fact that you're building for offline, because when we were doing Aadhaar in India and the legal framework for Aadhaar, which underlies all our DPIs, one of the key game changers was from moving from online authentication to offline verification, because we realized that that was a big need. So this is where the Global South, I think, needs to learn from each other, because these problems are somewhere similar. Last word perhaps to you, Seema, on this, in terms of your actual experiences in ensuring that you have control over whatever is within your ring fence, but what's outside is something that you trust and you think will further the goal of sovereignty and sovereign AI, as you mentioned. Something from your practical experiences.
Yeah, so let me just give you what most of us are doing and why it is pertinent and it's important. Currently we are building for demand, so it's like a gigawatt AI factories, huge amount of compute, huge amount of data centers. It has to be done responsibly in all ways, and a lot of money. I think what's important is how does this work between the government and the enterprise. I think that is the recipe for success. So there are 3-4 things which I have a take. One, of course, is basically the policies need to evolve along with the infrastructure, right? They are not paced at the same. So that, I think, is important. The second thing is government must lay the sovereign guardrails. It's all spoken about, but you don't have them. So it's very difficult. Third, I think what is also important in every country to help the industry to build that capacity is also give, not only have a long-term stability of your policy, but also look at commitment so that private enterprises, private industry is confident of building that huge capacity for you. I think that's very, very key. And last but not the least is definitely look at security and regulatory, not at point-in-time checks, but more move it to a continuous verification process. But this will ensure your sovereignty is implementable. You can also, kind of enforce it and get the best results out of it in terms of outcome. My closing remarks. One, of course, I did speak about before, in terms of how you treat this asset. You got to treat it like any other national asset. Second is government needs to extend that hand in becoming an absolute sovereign partner or a public-private partner to the industry. And third, as industry needs to really focus on innovation, scale, time to value, time to market. I think that's where your sole energy should go. And last but not the least, this is a co-accountability for every country. It can't be one over the other, right? And that will ensure you safeguard your national interest and also do scale and progress without compromising your transformation times and things like that. So you're not left behind. See, AI is a journey where we don't want any country to be left behind. For one, lack of resources, lack of definitions, security, sovereignty, access. I think we need to have that. I really like the theme. Right? It says welfare for all and happiness of all, and that should really be the case if it is so very, transforming in nature.
That's right. And I think if we were to quickly wrap up with some takeaways, because we see that the purpose of this session was that data sovereignty shouldn't be just theoretical, a slogan. It has to work in practice. And what I took away from the three of you who are actually walking the talk on data sovereignty is in terms of the role of the market is essentially to build sovereign AI in whichever country you may be in, and build it yourself, stored locally, and ensure that you have trusted partners when you are partnering with someone, because it's obviously futile to try to even think about doing anything yourself. As far as governments are concerned, again, I like the word you used, co-accountability. This is a partnership. And I think government has to build guardrails, but hand in hand with both the bazaar and the samaj, that's the society and the market. And as far as the samaj is concerned, the society, and Kala mentioned that about, at the end of the day, we mustn't forget that what we are trying to do is solve real problems for real people. So like she mentioned that the breast tissue in an African woman is different in somewhere else, and that's the person whom we are trying to serve. And I think that that is what is imperative for all of us to do. And I think it's appropriate to end with what Gandhiji said, that we must think about the last person in the line. And I think when we are talking about AI, just because we are in a kind of modern technocratic age, we shouldn't forget that it's that last person, the man or woman in the queue, the most unfortunate, who we must think about, because at the end of the day, that is for whom AI is built, and that is for whom we are talking about sovereignty. So we leave it there. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to my panelists for a wonderful session.
Amazing moderator.
Thank you. Please, could you all please wait for a second? I'll just hand over your memory.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I request everyone to please settle down. We'll be beginning the next session very soon.